Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. Um, so obviously this past Shabbos as a shul, we kind of felt the responsibility that the first yard site of Rabbi Teitz that we should do something specific to the shul. The community will do something Be'ezras Hashem next week or following week. But we felt for the shul we should do something as close to the first yard site. So this program was actually originally intended to happen this past Shabbos. But due to the freezing temperatures, we kind of called it off. And we have the advantage now that we don't just have the crowd of people here, but we have it recorded, so people can watch online also. The goal of the evening, I guess, the way it's going to work is we kind of have two separate chapters to the night. First, we're gonna hear from people who work with the Rabbi Teitz. And then the second half is going to be people who walked Rabbi Teitz to shul. And the goal is to hear from those experiences, whether it's insights, whether it's stories, and to be able to glean some inspiration in the hopes that we're not just inspired, but the inspiration helps us aspire and grow. And that's really the whole goal of all of this, is to remember the greatness of a man was here, how we related to everyone, how people had personal interactions that meant so much that we can be inspired from. And by remembering that man, it can help us aspire and grow. And so without further ado, we're going to begin by asking Rabbi Shapiro and Steve Sharp to come up. Josh is going to moderate for the rest. He'll ask the questions. So we'll kind of is to be more like a fireside chat. And then after that, we'll have the next three join us.
Thank you so much as they get their seats. We appreciate the opportunity to have more of an informal type of conversation. We felt one way to honor the Rav was to set up a formal shir that we sit down, that we can have a conversation. So we have with us Steve Karp, who worked for JEC for many, 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 many years, and Rabbi Pinchas Shapiro, who currently works for JEC, and both, as the Rabbi Steinmetz mentioned, is the working with the Rav piece. So the goal here is just to have a conversation. I did prepare with some questions. I didn't get so much ahead of time because we don't want to have rehearsed answers. But I think we want to start off with both of you have worked with the Rav on a daily basis. And is there something about the way he just operated, held himself professionally, that maybe you noticed that when you just saw him in shul or an event, you don't really get to see any experience that you have that you can maybe shed light on?
It's interesting because the way you phrase it, my answer in a sense is not really. I mean, the man that you saw was totally honest. What you saw is what you got. He was brilliant, and brilliant does not even begin to describe, what he knew. And the way he worked with people in public was the same way he did. He was genuine through and through. So when you ask that question, what I know is that individually, when he saw people, he was extremely involved in Gittin, helping women, hundreds of women throughout the country, throughout the world. And I was able to be there many times, even on Sundays when women came in there and they were receiving their get. And I saw personally how he talked to each one of them. Many, I would say the majority of those people were not from that he helped. And they had no idea what they were going through. And he just walked them through it step by step, explained everything over and over to them, how it's going to go, what's going to happen, what's going to be the next step after this. You gave them extreme confidence. And that was, but overall, what you saw in public is the man that you had.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. There was one Rav. It wasn't like there was a Rav in private and there was a Rav in public. He was so incredibly consistent. I was thinking about, certain things that we might have seen or known that the Hamonam might not have seen, not because the Rav wasn't consistent, but because proximity sometimes gives you an opportunity to see different parts of a person. And one thing that hit me earlier today when I was thinking about this a little bit was that I don't know if the Rav knew or not, but the Rav had an incredible sweet tooth. and he knew where in the building
Chocolate.
you can go to grab a piece of chocolate, and to whose office there would always be a stash that he can ask very almost sheepishly, if they had something. And that was something that he sought throughout the day. Another thing that we saw, that I think you and I experienced, that again most individuals might not have seen, was it's actually a halacha also, but it made such an impression on me. The Rav always ate in private. When the Rav would have lunch, or he would even take a snack, he would go into his office, and his office doors were always open unless he was meeting with somebody about a private matter. Even if he was meeting with somebody and it was a school business, the doors would always be open. He would only close them if it was a private matter or if he was eating. And he was very, very makbid on that. That when he was in the yeshiva and he was around, he would always eat in private. And we knew that if the doors were closed, we stayed away for whatever period of time it was. And when he was ready, he would come and he would open the door. That was something. There was just another anecdote that I thought very often the Rav would be coming or going and traveling, or we would be looking at the calendar and we would be talking about dates. So anybody who ever interacted with the Rav about time knew that the Rav had the mathematical calculations for all of the calendar, from I think Bria Sa'ilam until I imagine he knew when Mashiach might be coming, but he didn't share it with us. But he had that bonus. He knew exactly the Hebrew and the English dates for everything and how the parshas were going to lay out. So if somebody was born, he was able to say what the bar mitzvah parsha would be because he had the calculation in his head of what the Hebrew date would be, what the parsha would be that year. But what was amazing to me, or another level of the Rav's brilliance, was when we would be discussing things that either would be happening or things that had happened, the Rav would then refer to the daf that we would be up to in the daf yomi cycle. So, Lamashal, if we were talking in November and he was going to Eretz Yisrael, he wouldn't tell me what date he had the return ticket for. He would tell me on which daf he would be back in shul for. And on any given day, those who learn the daf yomi, sometimes it's hard to know which daf you learned that day. The Rav kept time in the daf, and those are just things that would come up in regular daily interactions and conversation that might not be something that you would have been
How
exposed
many was
to.
the
otherwise.
Maggid share for how many times did he finish the
6 cycles, I think.
Something recent, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that also might not have been known, everybody in the community was aware that the Rav gave the Daf Yomi shir. What many people may not have known is that the Rav also learned Daf Yomi Yerushalmi, and he did that Binistar. He never talked about it, but if you were in close proximity to him, you would see him sitting with the Yerushalmi very often, learning the Daf Yomi Yerushalmi also.
I think it's such powerful lessons of what you said, how like you could be yourself even in such a public and leadership position, the same person that you are in public that you are in private. It's something to strive for. I think we can all strive for that. And before, someone was telling me they're excited for me to moderate this because I have a teaching voice apparently.
Oh.
So when I talk, and it just makes me think of that, like to be the same person you are no matter what interaction. That's like a meter that we can all strive for. I think that's so important. Both of you alluded to already, and I'm sure you have a lot of examples of this. And I think it's important for us to sometimes share these examples where Rav Teitz was such a brilliant man. And we know that he was so practical and he's so knowledgeable, and not just about Torah, even though Torah was there, but everything. What are some of those examples where you saw just how he melded the Torah, right, and maybe the English, whatever it was, the math, just like so seamlessly? And maybe it was a business interaction, maybe it was how he talked to someone. I'm sure that he had some good times and bad times throughout his whole career, and I think that's something that we don't always hear about. So I'm curious if you have any examples of that.
But he taught. He was a PhD in math, as most people know. He taught at Rutgers, and at Berea needed a AP teacher at a point, and he stepped in there to teach the highest level to the Berea girls. The boys always looked at it, and we kidded around in the office and said that's another show of his brilliance, that he took the position in the girls' school not to teach the boys, he would teach the girls. It shows the cleverness over there on that part. For those are the teachers, right? Practical. I mean, his knowledge was incredible, and he used it in a very practical way. I mean, I'll give you two examples. Very personal. We had many decades ago a fire in our house, unfortunately, and the Rav turned to me and he said, "Do you still have your ketubah? Because if without that, we'd have to make a new one, what it is." And we went back to the house and we found the charred envelope. We pulled it out, and I won't go into it now. For some reason, there actually was two filled out complete ketubas in there. Something that took place, for other accidents, something that took place. But I knew that you're not allowed to have two ketubas. You can only have one. So I said, "Oh my God, what do I do now?" And I went running to the Rav. I went right in, I didn't even, he was in the hallway outside the business office, and I saw him. And I said, "I found the envelope, and you don't want the story, but there's actually two of them here." And he looks at me and he goes, "Oh." I said, "I have a problem." He took one, he tore it in half. He said, "No, you don't." And he just turned around and walked away. And I said, "But it's just like he just walked away." He was just like, "No, I don't have a problem." I mean, there's been no more practical than that. I always thought of that. That's when I was new to the community almost. And it's like, I saw him, I was just amazed. I said, the brilliance of that, right? And then since we were there working with him, my family and I were invited many times during Sukkot to his house to have a yontif meal with him. And in the Sukkah, he did something that he didn't do all year round. And that is that he would tell everybody, "You go wash before Kiddush." And this way we're outside. And it's totally practical. He didn't do that during the year. And he said, "I'm the only one that's going to go back inside the house and wash. And everybody else has to answer amen, take it one, and don't speak." And it wasn't easy. I had little kids over there, all the kids there. But it was just like knew the halacha, and that was putting it to practical use.
The speed with which the Rav resolved the ksuba issue, it highlights two parts. One is the clarity with which the Rav thought in every way, in addition to the brilliance and the speed. But he had complete and total clarity, and so whatever the question might have been, when it was a matter of halacha, and for the Rav everything was a matter of halacha, it wasn't really a subject for debate. There was clarity on those things, and it's to me also, I have this very small, silly personal anecdote, and it doesn't relate to work, but it happened in the JEC building. I can't remember how old the young man is now, but I believe it's Daniel Dambek's bris took place in the sukkah, in the JEC building, in the outside the 330 Elmore Avenue building, and there was a lot of human traffic going in and out, and all of that going on that day, and I don't think the bris took place in the sukkah. I think the sukkah took place in the sukkah. Anyway, okay, fine. But I remember being there with my son, and we were coming through the sukkah, and the doors to the right base medrash are adjacent to that sukkah. So we were coming in through those doors. And as I was coming in through those doors, we were going to go to wash, which was right on the other side of the next set of doors. So as we're walking through, the Rav must have been walking through. I did not notice him at the time. And I mentioned to my son Moshe, I said, "By the way, we're not allowed to do this. We're going straight from the sukkah through the base medrash. We're not supposed to do this." And without even breaking his stride, the Rav walked by, put his hand on my shoulder. He says, "And now you can, because you said a halacha." And that was it. And I didn't even know he was listening. I didn't even see him, but it was just like that. And the speed he lived, he was a walking, again, the encyclopedic knowledge, but for him, the entire life, the entire mahus was one guided by halacha. And so there was no, these are amazing stories to us, but to him, he wouldn't even recognize them as being anything interesting, because this is how you're supposed to be.
It's always like that. We talk about the Rav Medrash. He'd be in his office. He'd daven mincha a lot of times. The boys would come and get him from Ira, and it's walking in there. Sometimes I want not to do this, but I walk out, knock on the door, and tell him it's time for Ira, and I hold the door for him, and he said, "You go first." I go, "No, the Rav." He said, "But I'm holding a sitter in my hand." And it's like, at one time, I remember trying to hand him the sitter there and push me right to the door. And no, you don't do that. It's like, it was just
there was one other thing that after the Rav's Patira, one of the things we had to do is we made calls to various people that we worked with, that the Rav had worked with over the years, to make sure that they knew, but also to make sure that the relationship with the community was maintained. So it was, I think it was during the Shiva or right after the Shiva, we called the matzah factory, and we called the Meicher for the Lovim and the Yisroel, just to let them know they both heard already. And they had both said we were going to wait until Shiva until it was over to reach out. And we were reaching out to have the conversation with them. And what was fascinating to me is that they don't know each other. They don't know that they exist one to the other. And they both told me the same thing. When they spoke about how wonderful it was to work with the Rav over the years and how amazing and incredible of a human being he was, they both then highlighted that he was the only one that they knew who, when he came to the business part of the transactions, always came with two checks, one a personal check and one a community check. And they both highlighted how that was so incredibly unique and special and stood out to them. And I remember hearing that and wanting to run and tell certain people that story at the time. And I bit my tongue because I realized that if the Rav had heard that that was something that someone took note of as being special, it would have made him upset, because to him there would be no other way to operate. And yet we know from the story that not everybody did. And to him it was just, there was one way, there was the Derech Hashem and what the halacha says.
I think that's a great segue to my next question. Is there anything that you got to eyewitness yourselves that the Rav did quietly, like that story, that just stuck with you? And we'll have to be mochalas for saying it out loud. But so, what are some of those other stories that?
So, I mean, one of the things that got to me that I always thought about, the Rav is the one who convinced his father to go ahead with the heir of the community. And the importance of it to make, grow into attractive people. It was necessary, and everything's done kalacha, of course. But we also know those that knew him, the Rav himself wouldn't even wear a watch itself. I mean, this is 100% kosher Erev. There's no question that we should have any shilas in Erev community, but he chose personally that he wasn't going to hold by it. He would even take his watch off and put it with his keys and everything in his shtender. But I also know that when Rav Pinchas Teitz needed to come to shul and he was in a wheelchair, which was pushing and carrying on that day, the Rav would in no way give up his turn. He took turns with his sisters, his brother-in-laws, and other members of the family. And when it was his week to push the Rav, he pushed the Rav. It's like it's 100% kosher error. I'm not going to give up that space of taking my father, because I know it's a good kosher. I don't want to use it, but I don't have to. But in this case, covered up, for father was priority.
And you get to this in the next segment, but that's a schus that was able to be paid back by some of the people in the community decades later. And I think that's a special parallelism there. There's some people have mentioned different parts of this nakuda, but I don't know if they've ever been said together. And this is something that the Rav did incredibly quietly, but it was so important to him. The Rav was almost by accident one of the leading Mesadrei Gittin in America for several decades. And by say inadvertently, that he was asked once to be Mishamish on it, and then the person who he was assisting passed away, and there were cases that were left, and the Rav stepped in to take those cases, and then one's gorer at the next. The Rav had a shita that he would not profit from other people's misery. That was the way he termed it. And so he refused to take any money for Gittin. The problem with that is, if somebody's willing to do something at no cost in a market, it collapses the market. And so there were other Rabbanim who needed for their parnasa to subsist on life cycle event payments, including Gittin. And so the Rav had to deal with this tension and this conflict, this refusal to take money on the one hand, but on the other hand, not want to take money out of the pocket of other rabbanim who might need it. And so what the Rav decided to do was he would charge market rate, or he would receive market rate for being a Masader of a Ged. And then he would take the money and twice a year go visit his Rebbe in Eretz Yisrael and give the money to his Rebbe. And he did this for decades. So that way, he never once kept any money from any of the Gittin or any of the funerals. But also, he wouldn't hurt other Rabbanim in the area by undermining the market. And again, that's something that his sense of his values and the way that he lived and his sense of Yashrus has mamish real world implications for him and for those around him.
How did he, don't share the times of, let's say, crisis, just think of it in your head. How did he go about prioritizing stuff? Like, I mean, you're already sharing some stories, and I'm sure he's had so much that he dealt with as a community, as the greater community. Like how did he prioritize things in the right way? And I guess I'm sure there were probably times you probably questioned those priorities, and like, what was that back and forth if you were able to have it with him?
I don't know if it's so much a back and forth. I mean, when the Rav made up his mind, you didn't question that end of it. You couldn't even try. But what I did see in his own life, in a sense, I mean, we all, would work Monday through Friday. The Rav was there. Motzei Shabbos, the Rav was there on Sundays like crazy, because that's a time that other people in Gittin, as Rabbi Shapiro was mentioning over here, there was, the Aguna, the women that were going through those problems. He'd always make himself available. It was early Sunday mornings, Sunday evenings, late at night, whatever it is. He would be in the office helping the people and making sure that they got the services that they need in that end of it. And that was an incredible priority for him over anything else.
And yet he would walk around the building at 6 p.m. and anybody who was in the employ of the JEC would be told, I charge rent after 6 p.m. And that was his way of saying, I'm recognizing that you're here late. I appreciate that you're here late, and I really want you to go home. And that was part of who he was. In terms of how you balance all of the needs, he just did it. It never seemed like there was a tension. It never seemed like there was a stress about it. It was, this is what needs to be done right now. And so this is what's going to be done. The question, though, that you asked could be interpreted a different way, in the sense that how did the Rav balance competing values, not just the values of time and stress, but when there were real competing values. And Steve and I have had the fortune and or misfortune of having experienced many things where what we would believe are absolute values come into conflict with one another. And the voice of the Rav, I originally started thinking of it as the Kasav Hashlishi, that could be a kriya between the two polling challenges, but really it wasn't the Kasav Hashlishi. It was just the right thing in that moment. And there's one anecdote that comes to mind, and it was a very, very heavy and difficult situation that was happening. There was, we're being recorded, so I'm gonna try and be circumspect. There was a challenging issue in the yeshiva that impacted one of our students very, very deeply. And I had to make a decision about how to handle part of that situation. And on the one hand, there was very clear steps that the law and civil liability would suggest need to be done. And as a man who operates HR, I think you could understand what that means, that there are things you're supposed to do, and if you do them by the book, you mitigate your risk as an organization, as an institution, as an employer. And I understood that to be the priority, because my fidelity is to preserving that what his father built, and that which he gave his entire life to preserve and to build and to grow. And running up against that absolute value was this other piece that had the recognition that if I did that, I could risk the overall well-being of this student in a significant way. And I had been sitting on this for a couple of hours. It was a decision that needed to be made that day. I'd been sitting on it a couple of hours, debating it greatly, so that I can frame it correctly to bring to the Rav. And when he was ready, I came into when I was ready, when he was available, I came in to meet with him, and I started to lay out the problem. And he at once sought to hear me out, but also to spare me the anxiety and the stress of saying over the entire story. And at some point, he says, I hear enough, and let me tell you how this is. And he said that the safety and the well-being of an individual, in this case of the student, is paramount, because you'll find a way to protect the institution. And if there's trouble, institutions move on. Human beings get hurt irreparably. And so that's what you have to do. And it took maybe 15 seconds for him to answer a question that I'd been sitting with and struggling with for a very, very long time. Because again, the absolute clarity, he didn't see all of he saw the emes and the truth of what needed to be done. And that's what we did. And we're still here, thank God, all these years later without having suffered for it. And I happen to have followed up with that student, and thank God they're thriving.
I think that's a great example of Rav Teitz's. Anyone who met him could tell he felt a responsibility towards you because you were part of JEC, or because you were part of the show, because you lived in Hillside. Like, you could really feel it, and that's some of the examples. I have a few more questions for you guys before we bring up the next panelist. I'm switching gears completely. Favorite joke of Rav Teitz that you can remember? Do you have one?
Well, I've quoted this many times. The Ravs has always told people, and I'm sure everybody knows this already, that he says that when his advice to young rabbis when speaking from the pulpit, we would always say, we get it right over here. It's, you could tell over a joke like once every 4 years or something like that, because that's how long it would take for somebody to forget it. You could tell a story once every 2 years because other person will remember it. But a good Devar Torah, you could probably say the next week.
Twice in the same joke.
Yeah.
The Rav's humor was, it was part of his brilliance. So he had this wit that was so speedy. And I wish we had recorded and or written down, because the overwhelming majority of the things that made him laugh came up live in the middle of the context of a conversation, and he would quote a pasuk that he thought was funny in the context of what you're saying, using a pun, or he could quote a divrei chazal, and the genius of it was you could only laugh along with him if you knew the pasuk, understood the pun he was making, and the reference.
And the person who laughed with him, and this is like one of the greatest joys of being in the office for so many years, is the Rebbitzin Elisheva Teitz. Brilliant. I mean, a Tanakh teacher, she studied with Nechama Leibowitz. It's like she's on that level. And they'd actually joke by quoting Psukim back and forth in Divrei Yomim. And it's like things I've never read. One would give up something, the other one would answer with something from Shlomo Melech. And it's like, and they would giggle to each other. It was adorable, but it was brilliant. It was way over my head.
My favorite ones, though, were the ones where the Rav applied this self-effacing humor to whenever it is that he would speak. So whenever he was introduced, he would respond if it was a good introduction. If it was a bad introduction, he wouldn't say anything. He would just say thank you and start speaking. If it was a really good introduction, he would say thank you for a speech that my father would have been proud of and my mother might have believed, right? Something like that. And then he would often make reference to the fact that he knows that he's the only thing standing between the Olam and Kiddush, and so he wants to have Rahmanas. And if he was ever the second person to speak, he would say he's a strict constitutionalist, he's against double jeopardy, and therefore He's going to be very, very brief. There was a series of those kinds of things that if you spent enough time with him, I got to remember them. My mind is weak enough that I don't remember things the first time, but the third and the fourth time, I was able to commit some of those to memory. And the other one was also the strict constitutionalist. He's very mocked on not applying cruel and unusual punishment to people, and therefore he would also make sure that he would speak very, very short with things. But just on that last nakuda, the idea that he spoke briefly was not because he didn't have something to say. The idea that he spoke briefly was that if he uttered a sentence, you could sit for a very long time unpacking what it is he was saying. And so he was able to telegraph a tremendous amount of information in very, very few words.
The other thing that was remarkable, also, if people who know made simchas, we made quite a few, is the Rav would always ask to speak last. And he always told me that it was, two reasons. One is that he was afraid that he was going to say something else that somebody else was going to say later on. He didn't want to take it from them. So he wanted to make sure that everybody got their divrei Torah in. And then he would listen very intently. He never prepared beforehand. He would just listen to what you said, and he would then take from those 4 speakers, circum that they use, put them all together. And as we know, at some point, make a gematria of it all, which fit perfectly with that simcha that's taking place. But he liked to go to the last, so this way he wasn't stepping on anybody's toes, and he always had something beautiful to say.
I remember we first moved into the community, not even a month in the community, and we had a baby, and it was a boy. That year, there was 3 brisses in a row. We were the third one. We said, like, at that point, it was right up to Sukkot, no one's going to come to the newcomers' bris. And people did come. That was amazing. But Rav Teitz came also. And we regret now we didn't record his speech. And we're so angry that we don't have it. But we knew that he gave a gematria for Kobe. And it was so special to us that he was there and he was able to be there. And we're like, we're literally nobodies. You didn't even meet us yet because it was literally within a month of us moving, but he made sure to be here. Okay, last question for you both.
Just on that last thing, he used to joke when he would come to TAI, I would say the last decade, he said that he wants a seating chart with everybody's names, and he wanted to put a pin on his shirt that says, "Hello, my name is Rabbi Teitz," because he felt like he didn't know, he just didn't know enough people.
Amazing. Last question for you both. What is a habit or value that you learned from the Rav that you still do?
That's not an easy one. There's so much on that end of it. It's Baruch I was lucky to sit there for over 2 decades next to the Rav and be in the community for decades before that. One of the things that I always admired, and I do now, and he did it during his busy life, is to learn more. He prioritized learning. I mean, when somebody was not in the office meeting, and he always had an open door, as Shapiro said, you'd walk in there, and otherwise he had a safer open. And whether it was the Shalmi or the Bavli or anything else, the Rogatshava, he was learning constantly. And don't waste time.
I love that.
It's hard to isolate just one thing, because when you spend that much time with somebody, they have a shva on you, and he was our Rav, he was a Rebbe, a mentor, and a guide in all of the things that we do. So his selflessness, not just his humility, but the way in which he served other people. He knew who he was and he knew what his capabilities were, but you would never know it from speaking. And the way that he just served other people is such an example. His clarity and his yashrus, there's no cheshbonos. It's such a fascinating thing, because when people are in leadership, there are so many different things that you need to keep in mind all the time and worry about. And for the Rav, there were no cheshbonos, because the right thing was always the right thing, and there was such clarity with that. And I'm a tremendous work in progress. Those of you who know me well, so I could take any one of those things, and I do every single day, and say that if I can just do myself one thing better or one step better in each of those areas, then it will have been a good day. And one of the things that I personally am trying to very strongly reconnect with, the rough sense of Masorah. We all know that, right? That he didn't move left or right if he thought the Masorah that he got from his Rebbeim or his father would have suggested something different. And there's so much power in that. It's clarifying, it's edifying, it's empowering, and it really it helps cut through. Again, it helps create that sense of yashrus. So every day walking into the office and knowing that the Rav is not there, but the lessons and the life that he lived are still present. Really, in each instance, there's something that we can draw on and we could aspire to be.
Thank you both so much for coming up and for sharing and for opening what we really appreciate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'd like to call up our next panelist, Gary Nadav Shili. Please join us in the front. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So this next part, as just they get settled up, it's called stalling for time, so you can get comfortable. When I was speaking with Rabbi Steinmetz about a way that we could honor and acknowledge Rav Teitz, we came up with this concept of working and walking with the Rav. And I think we just heard from two men who worked with the Rav Teitz for many, many years. And up here with me, I have the zchus to be with them. You're looking at people who dedicated time, energy, physical ability for so many years to go walk to the Rav's house, which we know is not so close to Shul, bring him to Shul so he could be here on time, get him back home also, and then you can go home to be with your families. And I think there are other individuals who also walked the Rav. They weren't able to be here, but on behalf of the Shul, and I mean this sincerely, like, thank you. Thank you for doing that, because thank your families. All those lunches that you missed should not go unaccounted for, and we really, really appreciate. I want to start with probably a challenging question, and that is, looking back at all those walks, what's one moment that just comes to mind that you always like remember and reflect on when it comes to walking with the Rav and Shams? Any one of you could start, whatever you want.
Got one right off the top, and I'm going to embarrass Jonathan, who's sitting here. That's why he's here, so we can get embarrassed.
He wanted to be on the dais with us
publicly, but it's the Rav always made a point to have a conversation with you, just about your life, your work, what's going on, and whenever and other people also when they walked, they try to bring their kids with them, because to me this was a huge zchus to do this, right? And I wanted my kids to partake in that and sharing it too. So I would have Jonathan come along when he could, usually on the way back, not on the way there. That was on me. But and then the Rav would ask him, he'd say, oh, what are you learning in school? What Gemara, what etc. are you up to? And it was after the first time I drill it into Jonathan, what are you learning? Make sure you know what's good. And Jonathan would be like, the first time it happened, he's like, with the bulls. And the Rav's like, naming 7 Masechtas, and Jonathan's like, yeah, I think that one. I'm behind the Rav pushing him, but I'm just, oh my God, but at least the Rav knows it's JC, so it's kind of on him. But it's I'm like, Jonathan, please, and it's like, then the Rav's like, oh, so what are you learning to get into it? And he's really like trying to ask questions, and he would bring it down to their level in terms of what it was and make it relatable. And it's like, what's going on? Oh, with the ox scoring. Oh, okay. And then Jonathan's like, yeah, with the Jonathan's like, oh yeah, that's a moed. And the Rav's like, no, that's a muad. And Jonathan's like, it's a moed. And I'm like, I'm gonna like stop. He's like, first of all, on the slim chance you were right, which isn't, like, do not correct the Rav. Like, Jonathan's like, no, moed. And I'm like, I was like, oh, muad. But like the Rav he's having fun with this. He's not getting upset with him. And he gives Jonathan, touching on like the sense of humor, like that quick one line. He goes, moed means holiday. Muad is goring, and trust me, it's no holiday to be gored by an ox. And Jonathan goes, oh, maybe it is muad. But it's just like, he was very, very relatable with them, and just keeping the conversation going. And to me, that's something that always comes to mind. I mean, there are other ones that happen through it, but that to me, is a highlight, that interaction.
Yeah, I think for me it was first off. I mean, I've lived in this community like Shuey has, Nadav has, for many many years, and the walks with the Rav, I learned so much about him that I would have never. I mean, yes, he's the rabbi of the community. Yes, he runs JEC, and just I remember also like took my son Shuey first time. We got there probably 10 minutes earlier than we should have. Rav wasn't ready yet. He's like, "You're early." I said, "We want to make sure everybody gets to shul on time." He's walking with us, talking to Shuey, and Shuey's telling him, Gemara, what he's learning, and the Rav says, "So what's your favorite?" And also his voice wasn't so great later on, so he said, "What? Yeah, Shuey, what's your favorite subject?" And I heard him say, "Please don't tell me it's gym." So Shuey didn't hear it. He kept, this is my favorite class. And then that first time we were walking, he used to teach in Berea, where Shira teaches, and for few years he never used a calculator, so he'd have my wife come in, teach the AP classes or advanced classes how to use a calculator. So he would the first time, and really every time I walked in, I know Berea math department's in good hands. I know everything's good with that. And he always, once in a while, he'd bring up the story. He's like, your wife was great with the calculator. She helped my students get through without it. And he was he had a very, very good memory about things in the community. And I tell people, it was just like walking with grandfather. Just, you could talk to him about anything.
Yeah, I think so. I'd known the Rav for 17 years before we started walking. It was during COVID, and we had just set the tent up on the new shul property because the Rav desperately wanted to daven for me. It was a very big part of his being, and I remember before that was the Erev Shabbos was the first walk home, but even just during the week, it was absolutely frigid in that tent, like outside. It was outside, and so we were literally putting tefillin on at home, wrapping ourselves in a coat, then a blanket, then coming to daven in the tent, and then leaving and going home again. So that Friday night, this is the first moment that I remember was that I just saw the Rav like disappear into the dark, like down north, and I was like, I was like, is somebody going with him? Like I didn't know, like it was Hefka because it was COVID and everyone was just coming together. So I started walking his direction. No, thanks, because he was very concerned about COVID, and so he like didn't want me near him. So I was walking about 10 feet behind him, and I tracked him home, and he didn't go on the streets. He went through what I can only remember as being like I just been watching Harry Potter back then. It was like the Forbidden Forest. But it was this ravine area, if you know where I'm talking about, also the left of north over there, but near his house. And it was like he was walking, and there's about this much before the cliffs on each side, and it wouldn't let me come near him. And there was this one area before. Now it's hard now, but it was hard. It was just gravel and trees and just very difficult for anybody to get down. Never mind somebody of the Rav's age. And so I stood basically about 3 feet to his left in case he would fall down this hill as he started walking down. And I remember thinking just to myself how dedicated he was, that this wasn't even a thought to go to shul that night and to walk back, knowing where he was going to walk back. I was following. But that's my first memory of just, it said so many things in such a short, span of time.
Love that. Orsino Park. Well, I remember also he told me, he's like, it's like, oh, you're walking back, and it's like, yes, it's like, you're late already for lunch. He's like, here's a shortcut.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm like, first time I took it, I'm like, this is a short. What is this? Climb up the hill, go on the path, and then down, and I'm like,
I remember when I dropped him off, he's like, you're always welcome to come in for Kiddush, but I'm sure you want to get home always. And he always, the newspaper, the news in the morning, the newspaper would be there. He'd bring it in to his wife, and then we, generally he knew exactly what was going on in the Jewish world, but the world in general, and he had a lot of things, to say about it, and it was always a good conversation about what was going on here, what was going on in the world, and it was. Was there anything that you found that the Rav was just always like careful or consistent about during those walks? Like I don't know, like was there like a ritual that you had to do when it happened, or what you're going to talk about? Was it that he initiated that?
I mean, at least with me, we would, it would always, he'd always ask how work was, I was a lawyer, how he would make lawyer jokes, which I'm not going to say in front of everybody, but it was, and then we would just, talk about, I asked him questions about, raising kids, and we would compare notes, how, you know, is our electronics good or not good? And he would always, talk about raising kids, parents are one thing, but the school's another. And, that type of stuff never really ends. He's like, I have kids that are, obviously, very old. And he's like, I'm still worried about them. I'm still raising them. So, it really would depend. It really would depend upon, the day. And, he was an open book when I was
Yeah, it was very comfortable. I mean, I think that he was an awesome individual, but at the same time was extremely personable. And I think that was something that I think, that people that didn't know him or had only seen him in shul may have missed. So, I think that he was extremely proud of his father's legacy. In fact, it was an incredible driving force. In fact, I think it was the driving force in his entire existence. And we would walk different routes to get to shul different days, depending on what or how. You get a whole timeline, a history of Elizabeth, a history of this house, and that this wasn't there when I first moved in, and now that's there, and my father, and it was an incredible amount of kibbud av and but kibbud av specifically, and just everything that he did was around that. So I think that the walks were each one was unique, because it was it could be raining and he'd be sitting in at one point after he was not walking, it was in the wheelchair, it was in the rain, getting soaked, like having a puddle in his lap in his raincoat, and yet just talking Torah, talking about his father, talking about the community. So I think it was never a boring experience ever.
And he was so appreciative of everybody, that he would say, he was just so appreciative. He knew that either we were getting up early, we were going to be, at least when I walked him, he's like, thank you so much. You have no idea what it means to me. And I always say, I said, Rav, this is, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to do it. But he was, it's one thing to say thank you, but he was just always appreciative of everybody that was helping him out to let him, help him go to shul.
He also had his path, right? When you're going in the morning, which side
Mhm.
is the
Yeah, he
sunny
knows
side for this, which side didn't have the bumps, want to cross here, take this way, and I used to ask him, like, it's like, oh, so we turn right here because this is the right, the block that we turned down when we went to shul. It's like, no, it's when we're coming home, it's the next block that we turn down, right? Because that one's got the sun this way, with the cars one way. And then I remember, like, certain areas also when he wasn't walking, the kind of a little bumpy in the wheelchair. And I went to him, I was like, Rob, like, if we cut through the church parking lot, it's smoother. He goes, no, I don't want to cut through their property. Like, it's not our property. Like, we'll stay on the public path. And, he had a couple more bumps, but he didn't want to go on, what wasn't his to go on.
I remember. Oh,
sorry. I would sort of feel for one thing that Gary said, which is that it always struck me that this is the Rav Ha'er, who comes from a legacy that is very, you can count on one hand how many there are like this in history. And I mean, a lot of people, especially these days, would take it as being a given.
Yeah.
How many people would line up outside my door to take me or walk with me or drive me? It would be something that would be a given. He was so humble that every single time, whether it was me or anybody else, it was almost as though we were doing him a favor. And it was like, to me, it was, how could you not? To me, it was, how could we not show cover to this individual, the Rav Ha'er? But at the same time, that just was such a clear indication of his anivus. It was always, he almost was shocked that we were doing something for him.
I remember one time he was getting ready to either I think a grandson's bar mitzvah or or granddaughter's bat mitzvah in Israel. He explained to me that he, obviously everything, a lot more hills. and he was trying to build up strength to be able to, when he goes to Israel, he didn't want to be in a wheelchair. So, he'd say, let me off here. I'm going to practice walking and then I'll go back in. So we did it for a couple weeks. And one time he's walking, and I still can't believe I said it. And he was getting close to the wheelchair, and I could tell he was tired. I go, Rob, come on, you can do this. He took 2 or 3 or 4 more steps, got into his wheelchair, and I remember saying, I said, I'm sorry for saying that. He's like, no, it was good. I needed that. And that's honestly, that's the way, when he was in shul, nobody would ever say that. But we were walking with him, it was like he was the same, but you just felt more comfortable to be able to talk to him. He's the Rav, but like as somebody, like a friend, like a mentor, like somebody that could share wisdom with you. And I remember the next time he said, "Oh, just so you know, I have more strength." And he made it to the wheelchair, and he kind of gave me a wink, like, and it was just I think I don't even remember if I told my like Sharon the kid. I just remember it, and I remember it was like a bonding moment, kind of. And yeah, so
That was part of his godless, right? His greatness was, Nadav, you were saying it. I only had the zchus to drive him one time from home from Irish, and I regret it. I'm like, I wish I had more opportunities. That's the truth. And it was from JEC. I was in JEC to his house, which is like a 4-minute drive. If you miss the lights, it's longer. The whole time he literally just spent apologizing. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a burden. And it's like no, it's the other way around. So I do appreciate it. I wanted to ask, what are some of those lessons or teachings that he would talk to you about on these walks that you wouldn't get from his drusha, right? When he's on the bima, like as we spoke about previously, like he always talked in usually a shorter manner. And even if you went to his Shabbat Shuvah drusha, you're not in for a long ride. So my assumption is yeah. Now, are you taking notes, Rabbi Steinmetz? I'm just kidding. My assumption is when you have a longer walk, you get more opportunity to have that Torah being taught. So, like, what are some of those? If you remember any, what are some of those lessons that you got from him because you had that long conversation as opposed to these short interactions?
I mean, one thing that I definitely got from Rav Teitz is that the needs of the community, this entire community as a whole, were the most important thing to him. And there was a difficult situation that had come up, and for whatever reason, the Rav, I mean, he would talk to me, and it was clear to me that the needs of the entire community were of paramount importance to him. And if there was a situation where somebody or something was affecting the community as a whole, he made sure that the community took priority over that situation, even if like it hurt him and it bothered him in his heart. He knew that, and that's something we all live in this community. Sometimes you take things for granted, and I think he realized it's really in a lot of ways it's a great place, and he understood that, and he knew that those needs took priority over everything else.
I think it's also something that Rabbi Shapiro and my father kind of touched upon too. There was just he knew everybody, and everybody was different. So I think anyone that you'll talk to who had the privilege of walking with him, along with him, it would be different, right? So it's he knew, right? Okay, these people I'm going to do divrei Torah with. These people I'm going to talk more about the neighborhood. These people I'm going to talk more about this history. And it's I again personally speaking, like he would give some Torahs. He'd ask with Jonathan, but a lot of times it's not necessarily my forte. but like, he would talk about the history. Oh, before this was middle income housing, before it was low income housing, I actually had an apartment here. Oh, this is the cost of my first mortgage, right? He would talk more mundane things with me because those were things that I would appreciate, and then I would talk a little like with Alex Spire, who's not here. We would walk the Rav a lot too. And it's, oh, what did you talk about the Rav? And the Rav would get more into the Daf Yomi with him because Alex is doing the Daf Yomi, right? So I think he knew each individual and was able to tailor the conversations that he had. And to me, that's it's big to know that, and to be at his station, and that he didn't, it's not that he didn't think. To me, when you have someone who really is a gadol ador, like they know who they are. They don't demand that respect. They know what it is, but they know who they are. And he always knew who he was, but he always treated you as the individual, as a person would need. Then he would know who you are, and he would joke too, right? Like, well, I would take him early in the morning, and in my later years, when I was under my dad's roof, I didn't have problems getting to shul on time because he used to wake me up. In my later years, I have a problem getting to shul on time. And the Rav took note of that, and when I take him in, and he'd go, "Oh, sure, this is Sukkot Zimra. Know where to find that in the sitter, right?" And it's like, yeah, thank you. Now I feel terrible, but but he knew, like, the jokes of what it was, and it was nice because to me, every individual who walked with him, like, you can have that separate conversation with them. He knew what not necessarily was important to them, but what they would like to converse about, and that's what he would hold the subjects on.
Yeah, I think as you get older and you have kids, you start to realize that there's really a unique relationship between parents and children. Meaning for friends and for family and for colleagues, you'll go out of your way, but self-sacrifice really comes much more naturally for parents when it comes to children. You'll do pretty much anything for your children. I think that two examples that I saw that just to echo what Shui and Gary, thank you. By the way, I'm getting old. I said I'm getting older. I said I'm getting older. No, so what they were saying is that the Rav was not feeling well for a long period of time for his nifter, and he would come out of the house and feel exhausted, and say every time it was for weeks at a time. He would say, I shouldn't be doing this today. And then after Shachris, he'd be like, I'm glad I went. And it was every day. And this was many of the times he came was because he was saying Kaddish for a woman who was a single person who had died, and no one was there. There was no family. So he was saying Kaddish for her. And then another time, I'll never forget, it was Erev Pesach, and he said to me, so he would always make the siyum here, but then somebody else had decided that they wanted to, and he didn't say, no, it's mine. Fine. But then he also realized that, I think it's Beis Yaakov, what is it called? Beis Yitzchak, right? Which I had never been to, by the way, and I'd been here for 20 years. And he goes, they daven earlier. So I went and got him, I think it was like 5:45. And it's pitch dark outside. He was not, again, he comes outside, he was exhausted, but he had to make the siyum. So we go into the minyan, and I was expecting there to be like a lot of people. It was a tiny minyan, which is actually, I think I just saw on social media, they were talking about, trying to revive the show. But it was a small group of people that he felt like the father to. He felt that this was his children, and he would do anything for them. And so he would get up early, very early, and would go and make this siyum for them. And when he was there, the amount of cover that he got is when you start to realize the decades of history that he had, which people that have moved in here more recently, it feels so new and it feels so fresh, and he could feel like maybe just the old guard. But when you went to places like this shul, you saw the pictures on the wall. You saw him as a very young man in some of these pictures on the wall, and now this was still these were his kids, and he had now grown up, and so it was a incredible experience to see that. It's something that I think I really learned a lot from as well.
Yeah, he also, like, I think Pinky might have said it. He felt like I don't know where the younger generation starts, but that, like, nobody really knew who he was. So one time we were walking, walking him home, and I don't even know who the husband and wife and the kid were. Walk by, we say good Shabbos. So then we walk by. He goes, they think that I'm your grandfather. That's the way people think. It was just, he he always felt that at a certain point, and we would always discuss when it was, like that the younger generation didn't, they knew he was here, but they didn't really, they had not, he felt like a little bit of like not as great a connection as those that were, a little older, or that had been here for a long time. But yeah, he was very conscious of that.
I have one final question, and I really want to thank you three again, and the two previous panelists for really opening up and sharing, and thank you on behalf of the community for willingly doing this, and we appreciate it. My last question is, what does it mean to you that you walked with the Rav? If you can articulate.
It was a privilege, and Nadav touched on this, Gary also, right? It's, to me, there wasn't a chance that I would say no, right? There were times I didn't want to. The nights I had to take him, early, like I didn't sleep Friday nights. Like it's like, I have a hard enough time getting up. I set an alarm, like I'm gonna oversleep. I can't let the rub down and have him late. Like I did not sleep Friday nights, like when I had to get him. Like, it wasn't something that I was like, I'm looking forward to. But to me, it was more than an obligation. I'm not saying no, right? It's, you're asked to do this, like 1,000%, and this is a huge covenant honor to do that. So yes, I would do that, right? And it's, and it's, going both ways. For a while, I didn't realize there was an option, that someone else would walk up. I was like, oh, you take this? And then I think Alex, like offhand one time, was like, so you need someone else to walk back. Because like I told him, like we're going out for lunch, and I don't worry, I planned that I'm gonna be late. And this whole thing is like, oh, someone else. I'm like, you can do that? And someone else, like that's an option. I was like, to me, like this, like it's, I don't know. To me, this was something that I felt extremely privileged to do. It was something that I don't know if Jonathan appreciates it now, but hopefully we'll look back on it too, like on the times where he got to walk him home and have that relationship, and have and again, Rabbi Shapiro, my dad touched on this. The Rav was always who he was. He didn't change in the scenery of what he was, but when you had the one-on-one time with him, he was always very personable. If you took your time to go to him, he was always very personable. And when you're with him, that shone through. And to me, I grew up, with my father, and was very close to the Rav with that. So I was able to learn a lot of these things growing up, and looking back, it's extremely meaningful. And to me, passing that on to my kids too is huge. You look at these, you look at who he was, and the gadol, and to me, this was a tremendous privilege, and something that I'm happy to do, rain, shine, cold, and you got to experience. I don't want to call it a personal side of him, because again, it's always who he was, but it's not something that you necessarily realized out in public, but you saw more of who he was, and was able to, at least for myself, appreciate that, and see these things, and even see, again, like you asked Rav Shapiro and my dad, like what did you learn from him? And it's like he had the concern that he had for the Rebbitzin over things. It's just like, and I'm like, oh, I don't shoot my wife like that. And it's just like these things where you just like learn. It's like just the small details on things where nothing should be an inconvenience for somebody, and it's I don't know, like it's just tough to put these into words. The only thing I could say is, I was extremely happy for this privilege, and would take it on any time in a heartbeat again.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, kind of echoing what Shuey said, I think what it meant was like a great privilege and honor to have a connection with the Gadol Hador. Somebody that no shots frontwards and backwards, is a math genius, was the head of a community, and I really was able to get closeness that I would have never been able to have otherwise. And now that he's no longer with us, I think about a lot of the things that we talked about, because coming from him, it just meant a lot. And I think I might have seen Alex walk him once, and initially it was just, I'll help walk Rav Teitz. Why not? Helpful. And it was just an amazing thing that, I used to look forward to it. Like if Alex had in the text, can you walk him? Absolutely. It was must see. I wanted to do it. And so I think what I take from it is that it was a great honor and privilege to walk with a gadol and to really be able to talk to him just like I'm talking right now about really anything.
Yeah, I'll reiterate what Gary and Shuri said, is that I actually would say that I think the biggest takeaway is that the Rav was walking with us, because it did not feel like he always would. And I think that this going through the 20 what is it, 23 or 22 years that I knew him, was that his suck that he would give you was extremely customized to your circumstances, and he was machmir on a lot of things. But I was always very surprised when people would tell me stories about how he would give them psak halacha on things, and it was things that were very life cycle oriented and very, very complex or business related. And it was what I think was what makes a person like this so great, was that they were able to distill all that Torah knowledge that they had, but then to customize it to your needs then. And a lot of people, and again, I have a lot of history with Lakewood. I have a lot of history with, certain black and white concepts. The Rav was never like that. And what was very interesting, for instance, at my wedding, he was at the wedding and there were two Adam that were going to sign the ketubah, and it had been finished ahead of time. And so there was a whole to do about what to do now, because it was supposed to be finished right there and then. And so he scratched off a letter, rewrote it, and then they signed. And this was just the way that he would work. And so I think that us walking with him walking with us, was just the way that he lived his life. It was the way that he came down to work with us, to be with us. He was operating up there, but was with us. And so I think that it was a unique opportunity, and something that I'm really thankful that I was able to be a part of. And I really would like, thank the Rav and his memory that he gave us that opportunity to be there with him.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to be up here and for sharing. Thank you
Wow.
everyone for coming. Thank you
Pleasure.
everyone on the live stream. Have a great night. Good.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
That was cool.
It's a faux pas.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Gary. It's great. Thank you so much.
Sure, we get it right home.
Yeah.